November 24th, 1971, a man walked into an airport carrying a black briefcase. Within a few hours, he would hijack a commercial airliner, collect $200,000 in cash, jump into a violent storm from thousands of feet above the ground, and disappear forever. No body was ever found. No confirmed identity was ever established. No arrest was ever made. More than 50 years later, investigators, journalists, former FBI agents, and amateur detectives are still asking the same question. Who was D.B. Cooper? And perhaps an even stranger question remains unanswered. Did he actually survive? Because if he did, then what happened on that cold November night may have been the most successful hijacking in American history. But if he didn't, then somewhere in the vast wilderness of the Pacific Northwest, a mystery died in silence. Tonight, we open one of the most fascinating unsolved cases ever recorded. A story filled with money, deception, courage, mystery, and questions that continue to haunt investigators to this day. Welcome to Midnight Archive, where forgotten files are reopened, unsolved mysteries are examined, and history's darkest questions are brought back into the light. Turn off the lights, put on your headphones, and step into the archive. The day before Thanksgiving is usually one of the busiest travel days in the United States. Airports become crowded with families, students, and workers trying to reach home before the holiday begins. November 24th, 1971 was no different. At Portland International Airport, hundreds of travelers moved through terminals without paying much attention to the strangers around them. Among those strangers was a man who appeared completely ordinary. Witnesses later described him as being in his mid-40s. He was approximately 6 feet tall and weighed around 180 pounds. He wore a dark suit, a white dress shirt, and a black tie secured with a tie clip. His hair was dark. His face was calm. His behavior was polite. Nothing about him suggested that he was about to become one of the most famous criminals in American history. The man approached a ticket counter and purchased a one-way ticket on Northwest Orient Flight 305. The flight was traveling from Portland, Oregon to Seattle, Washington. A short trip, barely enough time for passengers to finish a drink before landing. The ticket was purchased under the name Dan Cooper. At the time, nobody noticed anything unusual about that name, The man paid cash for the ticket. He collected his boarding pass and walked toward the departure gate. Security procedures in 1971 were dramatically different from those of today. Passengers were not subjected to the intense screenings that modern travelers experience. There were no advanced scanners, no strict identification requirements, no elaborate baggage inspections. A person could walk onto an airplane carrying items that would be impossible to bring aboard today. That simple reality would play a major role in what happened next. Flight 305 departed Portland during the afternoon. The aircraft was a Boeing 727, a plane that would later become central to the mystery. The man took a seat near the rear of the aircraft. Reports generally place him in seat YTC. Around him, passengers settled into what they expected would be a routine flight. Some looked out the windows. Others read newspapers. A few spoke quietly with family members. Nobody realized that the calm businessman sitting nearby was preparing to hijack the aircraft. A few minutes after takeoff, the man called over a flight attendant named Florence Schaffner. When she approached, he handed her a folded note. At first, Florence assumed it was another passenger attempting to flirt. That was not unusual. Without reading it, she slipped the note into her purse. The man leaned toward her. His voice remained calm. There was no panic, no anger, no excitement. Just a simple statement. "Miss, you'd better look at that note. I have a bomb." The words instantly changed everything. Florence opened the note and read its contents. The message informed her that the man possessed a bomb and wanted her to sit beside him. Despite the terrifying situation, she remained composed. She moved closer to him. The man then opened his briefcase slightly. Inside, Florence claimed she saw several red cylinders attached to wires and a battery. Whether it was a real bomb remains unknown. But in that moment, it appeared convincing enough. The threat was taken seriously. The passenger then calmly explained what he wanted. He was not interested in harming anyone. He did not demand publicity. He did not issue political statements. He simply wanted money, specifically $200,000 in cash. He also demanded 4 parachutes, 2 primary parachutes and 2 reserve parachutes. In addition, he wanted a fuel truck waiting when the aircraft landed. The message was delivered to the cockpit. The pilots immediately contacted air traffic control. Within minutes, federal authorities became involved. What followed was one of the strangest negotiations in aviation history. While authorities scrambled to respond, something unusual happened inside the cabin. There was no screaming, no visible panic, no dramatic confrontation. The hijacker remained calm. He ordered a drink, bourbon and soda. He smoked cigarettes. He spoke politely to crew members. Several witnesses later commented on how controlled and professional he appeared. It was almost as though he had rehearsed everything in advance. As the aircraft continued towards Seattle, authorities worked desperately to gather the ransom money. Banks were contacted. Federal agencies coordinated logistics. Law enforcement officers rushed to assemble $200,000 in $20 bills. The amount may sound modest today, but in 1971 it represented a substantial fortune. Every bill was photographed before being delivered. Investigators hoped that recording the serial numbers would eventually help them track the money. Meanwhile, the passengers on board remained largely unaware of the full situation. Most simply knew there was some sort of delay. The flight circled in the air while negotiations continued. Time passed slowly. Inside the cabin, the mysterious hijacker waited with remarkable patience. Eventually, Flight 305 arrived in Seattle. The aircraft landed safely. Authorities followed the hijacker's instructions carefully. The ransom money was delivered. The parachutes were delivered. Fuel trucks arrived. Everything appeared to be proceeding exactly according to his plan. Then came one of the most surprising moments of the entire case. After receiving the money, the hijacker released every passenger. One by one, they exited the aircraft safely. No injuries, no violence, no casualties. The passengers stepped onto the runway with little understanding that they had just become part of a mystery that would captivate the world for decades. Only the flight crew remained on board. The hijacker then revealed the next phase of his plan, and this was where things became truly extraordinary. Most hijackers wanted transportation to another country. Some demanded political concessions. Others attempted escapes after landing. But this man had something completely different in mind. He instructed the pilots to take off again. This time, he ordered them to fly south toward Mexico. He provided very specific instructions. The aircraft was to maintain a relatively low altitude. It was to travel at a slower speed. The landing gear configuration and wing flaps were also discussed in unusual detail. The requests immediately attracted attention. Aviation experts later noted that the hijacker seemed to possess knowledge that an ordinary passenger probably would not have. He understood technical aspects of the Boeing 727, and one particular detail would become incredibly important. The Boeing 727 had a rear stairway that could be lowered during flight. Few commercial aircraft possessed such a feature. Investigators later wondered whether the hijacker selected the aircraft, specifically because he knew about those stairs. As darkness fell across the Pacific Northwest, the aircraft prepared for departure. Rain clouds filled the sky. Strong winds moved across the region. Visibility was poor. It was exactly the kind of night most people would avoid if they had any choice. Yet somewhere inside the aircraft, a man carrying $200,000 appeared ready to jump into that darkness. And nobody on board truly understood what would happen next. As Flight 305 lifted off from Seattle for the second time, the atmosphere on board changed completely. The passengers were gone. The cabin was nearly empty. Outside the windows, darkness had swallowed the landscape below. Rain battered the aircraft. Strong winds moved through the night sky. Somewhere beneath those clouds stretched thousands of square miles of forests, mountains, rivers, and wilderness. If someone were to jump into that darkness, finding them again would be almost impossible. Inside the aircraft, the mysterious hijacker appeared calm. The ransom money had been secured. The parachutes were on board. Everything he had demanded was now in his possession. For several minutes, little happened. The aircraft continued south. Military fighter jets secretly followed from a distance. Authorities hoped they could observe whatever happened next, but the weather was terrible. Visibility was limited. Even trained pilots struggled to keep visual contact. At one point, the hijacker instructed a flight attendant named Tina Mucklow to accompany him toward the rear section of the aircraft. Unlike many criminals, he remained surprisingly polite. He did not shout. He did not threaten unnecessarily. Witnesses later remembered him as calm, respectful, and strangely professional. Tina spent more time with the hijacker than almost anyone else. Years later, she would become one of the most important witnesses in the case. She later described him as intelligent, composed, and remarkably controlled. Nothing about his behavior suggested panic. Nothing suggested uncertainty. It seemed as though every step had been carefully planned. The hijacker eventually ordered Tina to return to the cockpit. Before leaving, she noticed him preparing the parachutes. She noticed the money bag. She noticed that he appeared focused on something near the rear stairway. Then she left. The cockpit door closed. For the crew, the next several minutes were among the longest of their lives. Nobody knew exactly what the hijacker intended to do. Would he force the aircraft to continue farther south? Would he demand another landing? Would he attempt to escape once the plane reached another destination? Then something unusual happened. A warning light illuminated inside the cockpit. The crew immediately noticed it. The light indicated that the rear stairs had been activated. The hijacker was opening the staircase, while the aircraft remained thousands of feet above the ground. The pilots attempted to communicate with him. No response. Minutes passed. Then they felt a sudden change in the aircraft's movement. A noticeable upward motion, almost like a shift in weight. A bump. A movement. Something had happened. Nobody inside the cockpit knew exactly what, but investigators later believed that precise moment may have been when the hijacker jumped. Into the darkness. Into the storm, into history. When the aircraft finally landed in Reno, Nevada, authorities moved quickly. Armed agents surrounded the plane. Search teams rushed on board. Every second mattered. If the hijacker was somehow still inside, they intended to find him immediately. But the search revealed something astonishing. The hijacker was gone. The money was gone. One parachute was missing. Several items remained behind. But the man himself had vanished. The rear stairs had indeed been used. Investigators now faced a question unlike any they had encountered before. Had a man actually jumped from a commercial airliner at night during a storm and survived? Or had he fallen to his death somewhere in the wilderness? The FBI launched one of the largest investigations in its history. The operation eventually became known as NORJAK, short for Northwest Hijacking. Agents began collecting evidence immediately. The tie left behind by the hijacker became important. Fingerprints were collected. Witnesses were interviewed. Flight records were examined. Maps were studied. Search zones were established. Hundreds of investigators became involved. One of the first major challenges involved determining where the jump actually occurred. That might sound simple, but it wasn't. The aircraft had been moving through poor weather conditions. Wind speeds varied dramatically. Exact flight data was incomplete. Even small errors could shift the estimated landing area by miles. Eventually, investigators focused on a region near the border between Washington and Oregon. The area consisted largely of dense forests and rugged terrain. It was the kind of landscape capable of hiding almost anything. Search teams entered the wilderness. Helicopters scanned from above. Ground crews combed through forests. Rivers were examined. Mountains were searched. Day after day, investigators searched for evidence, yet nothing significant appeared. No body, no parachute, no money, no clothing, no remains. It was as though the hijacker had simply disappeared. This lack of evidence created immediate debate. Some experts believed survival was impossible. They pointed to the weather. Heavy rain, strong winds, extreme darkness, cold temperatures, dangerous terrain. The hijacker had jumped wearing a business suit and loafers. Hardly ideal clothing for a parachute operation. In addition, investigators later discovered that one of the parachutes he selected was not designed for experienced skydiving. Some experts argued that his choices suggested limited parachuting knowledge. Others disagreed. They believed the hijacker knew exactly what he was doing. Supporters of this theory pointed to his detailed instructions regarding the aircraft. He understood airspeed, he understood altitude, he understood the Boeing 727's rear staircase. Such knowledge suggested planning, perhaps even military or aviation experience. The debate would continue for decades, and every new theory only made the mystery deeper. As months passed, the investigation expanded. The FBI received thousands of tips. People across America became fascinated by the case. Some claimed to know the hijacker. Others believed they had seen him. Letters arrived. Confessions appeared. Rumors spread. The media transformed D.B. Cooper into a legend. And ironically, the name itself was partially the result of a mistake. The ticket had been purchased under the name Dan Cooper. Yet, an early reporting error introduced the name D.B. Cooper. Once newspapers began using it, the nickname spread everywhere. Eventually, it became permanently attached to the mystery. The FBI pursued countless leads. Some focused on former military personnel, Others examined experienced parachutists. Criminal records were reviewed. Thousands of suspects were investigated. Yet one by one, potential candidates were eliminated. Some lacked the necessary skills. Some possessed strong alibis. Others simply failed to match witness descriptions. Years passed, then decades. Still no answers emerged. By the late 1970s, many people assumed the mystery would never be solved. Then an unexpected discovery shocked investigators. In February of 1980, an 8-year-old boy named Brian Ingram was vacationing with his family along the Columbia River. While digging in the sand near a place known as Tina Bar, he noticed something unusual. Buried beneath the surface were bundles of decaying $20 bills. The money appeared old, extremely old. Authorities were contacted. Investigators quickly compared the serial numbers. The results stunned everyone. The money belonged to the D.B. Cooper ransom. Nearly 9 years after the hijacking, part of the ransom had finally been found. Yet instead of solving the mystery, the discovery created even more questions. How had the money arrived there? Had it washed downstream? Had Cooper buried it? Had someone else moved it? Why was only a small portion discovered? Where was the remaining money? Investigators searched the area extensively. Nothing else significant was recovered. The mystery had become even stranger. The only confirmed physical evidence linked directly to Cooper after the jump was a few bundles of money found beside a river years later. Everything else remained unknown. For many investigators, that discovery changed the case forever. Because if Cooper died immediately after the jump, how did the money end up there? And if he survived, why had none of the remaining cash ever surfaced? The questions continued to multiply, but the answers remained hidden somewhere inside a mystery that refused to die. By the time the 1980s arrived, the D.B. Cooper case had already become something larger than a criminal investigation. It had become a legend. Across America, people debated the mystery in restaurants, bars, offices, and living rooms. Books were written. Television specials were produced. Journalists chased leads. Amateur investigators studied maps and flight records. Everyone seemed to have a theory, Yet, despite years of investigation, the FBI remained no closer to identifying the man who had vanished into the night. What made the case so frustrating was that every piece of evidence seemed to point in two different directions. One clue suggested Cooper was an expert. Another suggested he was an amateur. One theory suggested he survived. Another suggested he never made it out of the storm alive. And somewhere within those contradictions, the truth remained hidden. As investigators examined the case, several questions continued to stand out. Why did Cooper choose a Boeing 727? Why did he request 4 parachutes instead of 1? Why did he remain so calm throughout the hijacking? And perhaps most importantly, how did he disappear without leaving behind a clear trail? The request for 4 parachutes fascinated investigators. At first glance, it seemed unnecessary. One man only needed 1 parachute, yet Cooper demanded 4. Some agents believed this was a deliberate strategy. If authorities thought he might take a hostage during the jump, they would be less likely to sabotage the parachutes. By requesting multiple parachutes, Cooper may have prevented law enforcement from providing defective equipment. If true, it demonstrated careful planning and psychological awareness. It suggested he understood how negotiators might think. Another mystery involved his apparent knowledge of aviation. The average passenger in 1971 would not know much about a Boeing 727's rear stairway. Yet Cooper seemed familiar with the aircraft's capabilities. He knew the plane could fly slowly enough for a parachute jump. He knew the rear stairs could be deployed. He understood details that many ordinary travelers would never consider. Some investigators concluded that he must have possessed military experience. Perhaps he had served as a paratrooper. Perhaps he worked in aviation. Perhaps he had technical training acquired during the Cold War. Others disagreed. They pointed out several mistakes. For example, Cooper reportedly selected a parachute that experienced skydivers would likely have avoided. He also jumped wearing unsuitable clothing, a business suit, loafers, a trench coat, hardly the equipment of a professional parachutist. These details created confusion. Was Cooper highly skilled, or was he simply lucky? The FBI spent decades exploring potential suspects. One of the most discussed names was Richard Floyd McCoy. McCoy committed a remarkably similar hijacking several months after the Cooper incident. Like Cooper, he demanded ransom money. Like Cooper, he used parachutes. Like Cooper, he escaped by jumping from an aircraft. The similarities were impossible to ignore. Many people became convinced that McCoy and Cooper were the same person. Yet significant problems existed. Witness descriptions did not fully match. Certain timelines created difficulties. Several investigators who worked the case ultimately rejected the theory. Another frequently discussed suspect was Kenneth Christensen. Christensen had military experience. He worked for an airline, Me. His physical appearance resembled witness descriptions in certain respects. After his death, renewed attention focused on him. Some researchers believed he possessed the necessary knowledge and opportunity. Yet definitive proof never emerged. Others pointed toward Robert Rackstraw. A former military pilot with an intriguing background. Rackstraw possessed skills that seemed compatible with the hijacking. His history contained elements that attracted investigators and journalists alike. For years, supporters argued that he was the strongest suspect. Yet once again, evidence remained inconclusive. No matter how promising a suspect appeared, the case always returned to the same problem. There was never enough proof. Every theory seemed convincing until examined closely. Then weaknesses appeared. Then doubts emerged. Then the mystery continued. As technology improved, investigators hoped science would succeed where traditional detective work had failed. The necktie left behind by Cooper became one of the most valuable pieces of evidence. Modern forensic testing examined particles found on the tie. Microscopic materials revealed clues about the environments in which Cooper may have worked. Some analysis suggested exposure to industrial metals and specialized manufacturing processes. This led some researchers to speculate that Cooper may have worked in aerospace or engineering-related industries. Such findings generated excitement. Yet even these discoveries failed to provide certainty. The evidence pointed toward possibilities rather than conclusions, and so the investigation continued. Year after year, decade after decade, without resolution. Eventually, after more than 40 years of investigation, the FBI made a historic decision. In 2016, the agency officially suspended active investigation of the case. With the announcement marked the end of one of the longest-running criminal investigations in American history. Thousands of suspects had been examined. Countless tips had been reviewed. Millions of dollars had been spent, yet the mystery remained unsolved. For many people, the announcement felt strange. The case had occupied such a powerful place in American culture that it seemed impossible to imagine it simply ending. But despite the FBI's decision, public fascination never disappeared. Even today, new theories continue to emerge. Researchers continue examining evidence. Documentaries continue exploring possibilities, and ordinary people continue asking the same question. What really happened to D.B. Cooper? To answer that question, we must consider the two theories that dominate the debate. The first theory is simple. Cooper died. Supporters of this explanation point toward the extreme conditions surrounding the jump. It was nighttime. Heavy rain reduced visibility. Powerful winds affected navigation. The terrain below was dangerous and heavily forested. The temperature was cold. Cooper lacked proper equipment. He carried a heavy bag of cash. According to this theory, survival was unlikely. Perhaps he landed badly. Perhaps he became lost. Perhaps exposure eventually killed him. If that happened, nature could have concealed the evidence for decades. The Pacific Northwest contains vast regions where a person can disappear. Supporters of this theory believe Cooper never intended to become a legend. He simply made a fatal mistake. Then there is the second theory, the theory that transformed D.B. Cooper into an icon. According to this explanation, Cooper survived. Not only did he survive, he escaped completely. Supporters argue that his calm behavior demonstrated preparation. His knowledge of the aircraft suggested planning. His strategic requests suggested intelligence. Perhaps he had selected the jump zone in advance. Perhaps an accomplice waited below. Perhaps he successfully disappeared and began a new life under a different identity. If true, it would represent one of the most extraordinary escapes in criminal history. A man boards an airplane, demands money, receives the ransom, jumps into the darkness, and is never seen again. No prison sentence, no capture, no confession. Just silence. For many people, this explanation remains irresistible, because humans are naturally drawn to mysteries, especially mysteries that challenge authority. The idea that someone outsmarted one of the world's most powerful investigative agencies captures the imagination. Yet fascination does not equal proof, and that is why the case continues to endure. Neither theory has won. Neither theory has been conclusively defeated. The mystery survives because uncertainty survives. More than half a century has passed since that stormy night. Most of the witnesses are gone. Many investigators have passed away. The world itself has changed dramatically. Yet the image remains vivid. A lone man standing at the rear of an aircraft. A bag filled with cash. A parachute strapped to his body. Rain striking the fuselage. Darkness stretching endlessly below. Then a jump. A single leap into the unknown. And with that leap, DB. Cooper entered history. Perhaps he died before reaching the ground. Perhaps he walked away and lived for decades under a different name. Perhaps the truth lies buried within evidence that has not yet been discovered. Or perhaps the answer disappeared forever on the night of November 24th, 1971. What makes this case extraordinary is not merely the crime itself. It is the absence of an ending. Most stories eventually reach a conclusion. Mysteries are solved. Criminals are identified. Questions receive answers. The D.B. Cooper case refused to follow that pattern. Instead, it became something rare. A mystery capable of surviving generations. A puzzle that continues to challenge investigators long after the event itself. And maybe that is why people remain fascinated. Because, deep down, everyone wants to know what happened after the jump. Everyone wants to know whether the man who called himself Dan Cooper reached the ground alive. Everyone wants to know where the money went. Everyone wants to know the identity hidden behind the legend. But for now, those answers remain locked away. Somewhere beyond the evidence, somewhere beyond the theories, somewhere beyond the reach of investigators. And until new proof emerges, the man known as D.B. Cooper remains exactly what he has been for more than 50 years. A ghost, a legend, and perhaps the greatest unsolved mystery in American criminal history. This has been Midnight Archive. If you enjoyed exploring this mystery, remember to subscribe and join us for more forgotten cases, unexplained disappearances, and true stories that continue to haunt the world. Because somewhere out there, another file is waiting to be opened, and another mystery is waiting to be uncovered. Good night.